Good morning. Thank you, Jimmy, and I'd like to thanks also the Peter Organ and all the Gaelic Game Association for inviting me this morning. Whoops, this is my bottle of water. So we're starting with the day with a French accent, French-Canadian accent, and you'll finish with the Australian accent this afternoon. So hopefully I'll be able to keep you awake for the next 45 minutes, and I'll try to use some of the Irish accent that I acquired with my trips here. So it's always great to be in Dublin. I'm very happy to be here this morning. And what I would like to share with you is a little bit of a summary of the research that we've been doing for the last 10 years on athlete development and coaching. So a lot of the presentation is about sport development. It's about what we do, the way we should try to structure youth sport so that we optimize the environment so that children have the opportunity to increase their performance and enhance their participation in sport and stay involved in sport. So I'm going to take a very broad perspective of sport, of youth sport, and at the end I will try to come up with insights in terms of coaching. So really the perspective that I'm taking, and I put this together to try to look at sport in terms of a sequence of events that happens. So when we look at sport, there's an outcome at the end that we want to achieve, but there's also things that happen along the way. And really we start with some influences at the beginning, then there's a process of sport, and then there's outcomes that we want to achieve. And if we populate this, and this is happening over time. So one little thing I want to say is that the handout that you have, there's some little changes that I've made on the handout, so it's not exactly what I will be presenting. There's just a couple of things that are different. But when we look at this model, and this is the model that I'm going to use throughout the presentation, and I'm just going to go through these steps, is when we look at youth sport, it is influenced by the impact of youth sport. There's some influences that happens from the environment. So where does sport occur? City, clubs, facilities that you have as a coach. So those are the environment. Then there's individual characteristics. So the athletes that I have, the age of my athletes, the gender, men, women, boys and girls, the age, their physical abilities, their mental attributes. So all these things need to be considered when we talk about coaching. And finally, there's the social agent. So the people that are involved in sport, the parents, the peers, the coaches, everybody that's involved could be included in this box here. And then there's the process of coaching. The process of coaching is, what do I do as a coach? So there's activities, developmental activities that youth get involved in, that I've tried to reach certain outcomes or certain processes that I will label the 4 C's here. And at the end of all this, the ultimate outcomes of sport, we could talk about the 3 P's. And I think those are very important. So in terms of outcomes that we want to achieve with sport, is we want to increase participation. We want to try to enhance performance. And probably what we want to do too is try to develop better people, better citizens. So we call this personal development. So I'm just going to go through these quickly at the beginning to give you the framework, and I will talk about some research that look at some of those links between those variables. So in terms of influences, sport is influenced by individual characteristics, so the physical attribute, so age, gender of the athletes. Sport is also influenced by social agents, so coaches, teachers. But you see, coaches is only one part of the big picture here. So as a coach, there's an interaction, and we need to consider the environment, the individual characteristics, the parents, and all these things. And then the environment, there's policies, access to facilities, the clubs, the communities that I'm in. All that will have an impact on the ultimate outcome. So as a coach, there's only one little person, one little thing in this whole model here. And as a coach, you need to consider the other thing, the environment, and I will talk about all these things, all these variables. So the process of sport happens through developmental activities. So the process of sport, really, the engine of sport is the practice and the games that we're doing and the activities that the kids are involved in. That's really what at the heart of sport. So we could divide very easily the activities that children get involved in sport into youth-driven activity or adult-driven activities. So youth-driven activities would be the play that children do without a coach, and a lot of the talk, I will talk about these activities as being very, very important for youth. Getting involved and not having always an adult behind them telling them what to do. Adult-driven activities, so those are the things, the practice that I design as a coach or parents or any kind of adults that is involved in the sport. And then activities could be on a continuum from instrumental to intrinsic value. So as a coach, think about some of the things that you do in a practice. You have some drills that you will design, and the goal of that drill will be to improve performance. But you have other drills that you will design in your practice that the goal would be to have fun. And you can think about this. You have some games in your practice. So the fun aspect would be the intrinsic value. The performance aspect would be the instrumental. And this is the conflict that coaches have sometimes, is how much of my practice do I focus on fun? How much of my practice do I focus on improving performance? So that could be a continuum. So if you look at this, then we can devise those activities into youth-driven activities that have an intrinsic value or an instrumental value. Okay, so what I'm doing there is I'm giving you the vocabulary, and then we'll look at the research after. But a youth-driven activity, so there's no adults, there's no coach, that is done by youth for enjoyment, the intrinsic value, we could call this deliberate play or pickup games. So this is the type of activities where kids go outside and play football for fun. They go outside and play in the park, on the street. There's no adults to telling them what to do, and they're doing it just for the pure joy of doing it. And as you will see, this is a very, very important activity that we need to keep in our sporting system. We tend to eliminate this and to organize and over-organize sometimes our sporting system. But as you will see through the research, we find out that this is a very, very important type of activities for youth to do. And then there would be a youth-driven activity, but that is more instrumental, and we call this spontaneous practice. So this would be the type of activities where young people go outside or they go and practice by themselves, but there's no adults to telling them what to do, but they want to improve their performance. So that's the difference between instrumental and intrinsic value. In terms of adult-driven activities, so you're probably very familiar with these. So this is the type of things that, as a coach, I will design for my athletes. So the first one would be adult-driven activity that is instrumental, and that would be deliberate practice. So the prototype activities of adult-driven activities to improve performance is deliberate practice. So I go in a practice, I design the drill. The goal of that drill is to improve passing or shooting or whatever. So that's deliberate practice. Intrinsic values, you would go into practice and you would try to design an activity, a drill, but the goal of that drill is enjoyment. And we could call this play practice or teaching games for understanding, those kind of activities where kids are really enjoying it. It may not be the most optimal activity to develop performance, but there's a lot of enjoyment and fun associated with that. And then a mix of these two could be organized games. So if we put this on a quadrant, and then you have you can have an activity that is driven by adults or an activity that is driven by youth, and you can have an activity that have an instrumental value, improving performance, or an intrinsic value just for enjoyment. And what this gives us is different types of learning. And the punchline of the whole day is that in sport, we should try to involve children in these different types of learning and not focus on one. And when you think about youth sport today, there's a movement and there's a lot of pressure on people to just stick to this kind of activity, where we want to improve performance. It's directed by adults. And what this does, as you will see, and I will talk about the research a little bit, is that this will lead to dropout, burnout, and injuries in young people. So the challenge of our sporting system is to try to create an environment where there's opportunities for children to play themselves without an adult telling them all the time what to do, being at the bottom of this quadrant and being at the top also. So if you look at this, I won't go through this, but you have activities directed by adults. So that would be called rational learning, where it's for performance. Directed by adult, but intrinsic value would be the play practice here. That could be called emotional learning. And you have activities directed by youth for enjoyment. That would be the deliberate play. That could be creative learning. And directed by youth for improving performance, that could be called spontaneous practice and called informal learning. And organized competition is somewhere in there. So so I've just talked about these. I talked about youth, the type of activities that we get youth involved in. And then within a season, there's a goal when you design a practice, when you design those activities that you want to try to achieve. And very often in sport, the only goal that people care about is to improve competence, to improve the skill. But what this, and through a lot of reviews, what we've came up with is this 4 C's models of, it came from developmental psychology, it came from a model of, and it used to have 5 C's, but when you look at sport, when you think about sport for youth, what we want to develop is we want to develop competence, but we also want to develop confidence, connection, and character. So that's a big goal. So when you think about a season, when you think about spending time with your athletes, you design a practice. You don't only design a practice to improve competence, but you want to make sure that the young people that are involved with you also work on confidence, on connection with others, developing those relationships with adults, which are very important, relationship between the kids themselves, that's connection, and the character, respect for rules, integrity of the game, discipline. And so if you look at those 4 C's, they're pretty broad, but they're goals that when you start designing practices, designing seasons, keeping those 4 C's in mind help you to say, okay, what kind of activities do I want to involve? What kind of things do I want to do that would look at the big picture instead of only improving competence or performance? And then finally, the ultimate outcomes of sport that we can measure are performance, participation, and personal development. So that's over a lifetime. If youth people spend some time with you as a coach, and at the end, when they're 45 years old or when they're 30 years old and they're still playing sport for fun, you've achieved your goal of participation. Sorry, the first one is of participation. So you want to try to make sure that young people who are going through your program, they will gain a drive for sport that will keep going for the rest of their life. That's the participation one. Another goal of another outcomes of sport is performance. Do these people in your program, do they improve their skill and do they become elite level performers? Do they become professional athletes? And then that would be the performance aspect of sport. And then the last one is personal development. So do they go through your program and become better people? And if they do, you've reached that goal of personal development. So sport, and we know this and it's very clear, sport is one of the best activity for youth to develop their personal values, personal assets. But it could also be an activities that develop negative values and negative things, aggression and cheating and all these things. When youth go through your program, it is very important to focus on that and as this as an ultimate outcome of sport. So those 3 Ps, again, seems to give us the ultimate outcome in terms of long-term achievement in sport. So what I want to do is, in the next 35 minutes, I'm just going to go through some research that looked at some of these relationships. And the first one is to look at what is the impact of the environment on the 3 Ps. And I'm going to look at the impact of some different type of activities on the 3 Ps. And then the last one is I'm going to look at especially coaching research, looking at how coaches can impact directly competence, confidence, connection, and character. Okay, so the first one, we're going to look at the environment. And this is not directly linked to what coaches do, but you will see the link here in terms of how do I set up a club, how do I set up an environment for my young people in sport that will achieve those performance, participation, and personal development. So what I'd like to do here is present some research that looked at the birthplace effect. And I'm going to present a lot of studies here, but just give you an idea of when we look at what we did here is we did some study to look at the city size and how the city size is related to elite performance, to professional achieving elite performance in sport. So if you think about sport and city, so in North America, we could have some hypothesis about if you practice sport in Dublin versus if you practice sport in a small village, the environment would be different. Same thing in North America. We did study in the US and Canada. If you practice sport in New York City versus you practice sport in the smaller cities, the environment is very different. And anecdotally, we thought that those differences could lead to some differences in terms of performance and participation. So you could look at this here. In a smaller cities, you would have facilities may not be optimal. In bigger cities, you would have better pitch, better facilities. Often in smaller cities, you will have more casual coaching, better coaching, specialized coaching. There's more monies usually in big cities. In smaller cities, you would have kids playing sport for fun on the street. Safety is not an issue. There's variability in players' age, size, and abilities in smaller cities. Kids of different age and size playing together. And more seasonal sport, at least in North America and smaller cities. In bigger cities, there seems to be more a push towards year-long participation. So when you look at this, you say, okay, is this the best for performance, participation, and personal development, or is this the best? Which environment here would be the best? And that's the question we wanted to ask. Do we have a greater proportion of elite athletes that come from big cities or small cities? Do we have higher participation rate in big cities or more small cities? And do we have better environment in big cities or small cities for personal development? So I will answer the first question. So you could just take 5 seconds here and answer those 3 questions. Just say, big cities, who's the winner on each one of these? So are we in North America, are we going to have, or in Europe too, and Australia, are we going to have better success athletes? Do they come from big cities or small cities? Are their participation rate higher? And is it better for personal development? So answer the question by yourself, and then I'll give you the answer right here. So we did studies, and then here I will highlight 4 different studies that we've published. Over 4,000 athletes. You can look at the sport here. Ice hockey, so hockey, that's ice hockey. That's the only kind of hockey we know in Canada. Baseball, basketball, golf. These are professional athletes. So when you look at baseball, we look at the baseball players that were born in the U.S. that plays in the National League, National Baseball League. Same thing with hockey and same thing with basketball. So what we did here is we looked at the birthplace. We looked at on the internet at those professional level athletes, and it tells us where they were born. We compared the city size of where they were born with the census data. So in the U.S., there's a certain number of kids that lives in New York City, and there's a certain number of baseball players that come from New York City. Are there some differences there? So very simple things. Lots of numbers here. I will just go through this slide with you, and then the rest is exactly the same. It's very simple to understand. The first two columns are census data in the U.S. So in the U.S., there is, I will look at my screen here, but there's 9.9% of kids under the age of 14 that lives in cities that is over 5 million. Okay? There's 11.4% of kids under the age of 14 that lives in cities between 2.5 million and 5 million. Okay, so you just go through this. This is just census data, the number of kids, the percentage of kids that are born in each of these city size brackets. When you look at the third column, this is for U.S. ice hockey. There's 151 ice hockey players that were born in the U.S. This is the percentage of hockey players that were born in cities that is over 5 million. Okay, so 0.7% of kids, of professional hockey players that plays in the National Hockey Leagues were born in cities that is over 5 million. There's 2.6% of NHL hockey players that were born in cities between, okay? So you get the picture here of that third column. If everything was equal, if the environment is the same in terms of developing talent in sport, we should have these two columns, this one and this one, about the same. It should be like if the environment is the same, we should have here around 10%, and we should have here around 11%, and around these two columns should be the same. As you can see, the columns are quite different. What this third column here is odds ratio. An odds ratio of 1 or lower than 1 means that if you were born in that city size bracket, you have less chance of making it as an ice hockey player. So basically, odds ratio smaller than 1, you have less chance. Bigger than 1, if you're born in that city size bracket, you have more chance of making it. So that's independent of anything, independent of coaching, independent of just being born in that city size bracket gives you more chance or less chance of making it. So as you can see here, city of more than 500,000 in the U.S., very little chance of becoming an ice hockey player, just being born there. If you're born in a cities of less than 500,000, you can see here the odds ratio increase quite a bit with cities of 50,000 to 100,000, where the odds ratios is almost 20% here. So again, in terms of environment, what is it happening in that city size bracket? So what I'm going to give you is just a series of slides. It's exactly the same data. The first two columns are exactly the same. But this is U.S. basketball. So we just went by order here, and so this is the NBA. This is the number of a basketball player. Obviously, this column will change, and the odds ratio will change here. So we did the basketball because we thought basketball players in the U.S. they come from a big town like Los Angeles or New York City. It doesn't seem to be the case. Basketball players come from smaller cities. Was this basket? Oh, this was baseball. Sorry, this is baseball. Basketball, again, very similar trend, smaller cities. So this is football. This is American football. Very similar again, smaller cities wins. Golf, we thought, is there a difference between, so this is the PGA. Are there differences between individual sport versus team sports? You can see here the odds ratio being very small. Golfers seems to be coming. And when you think about it, the best golf coaches, they're probably in bigger cities. Best golf courses are probably in bigger cities. So it makes you wonder, do we really need the best coaching? Or what kind of coaching do we need? And I'll try to answer those questions. So women's golf, are there differences between men's and women's? Soccer, okay, a little bit different, but smaller cities, again, an advantage. And then since those studies, there's quite a bit of studies that have been done in Israel. We've done stuff in Australia, and really very supportive of this idea of smaller cities being. So, you can look at this and say, okay, so does it mean that if I'm born in Dublin, I need to move in a small village? Not really. And you know, I've done a lot of interviews on these. Like the media is very interested in these kinds of things. And people call from Calgary or Toronto and said, well, you know, my kid, should we move to a smaller place? Really, that's not the point. I think the point is we really need to think about what is it in those environments that promote talent. So I will talk a little bit about participation here. So there's an advantage for performance, but is there an advantage for participation? Is there? And there's one study that we've just concluded, and we're writing it up. But we look at a sample of over 100 and close to 150,000 youth hockey players in Ontario, in Canada. And we look at the relationship between participation and size of the city again. So the results are very similar, but here we have, so this is Canada, so we have population. This is the census data in Canada, so there's 35% of kids that comes in cities of over 500,000. And this is the registration rate, and this is odds ratio again. So when you look at participation rate again, participation rate is lower in bigger cities than it is in smaller cities. And then smaller cities, and here in this case, small cities seems to increase the participation level in ice hockey. And then there's a survey here, some data from a survey in Canada, where we looked at kids participating in sport in the 3 bigger cities versus towns between 10,000 and 50,000, and higher rates of participation in smaller towns. So the last P, personal development. So is it better to practice sport in a small cities or a big city in terms of the type of things that we want to acquire in terms of developmental assets? So we did a study. It's a little bit harder to do here, but what we did is we looked at swimming. We had 181 swimmers, and we had some swimmers that comes from cities of over 500,000 and swimmers that comes from cities of smaller than 500,000. And we give them a questionnaire that measured their developmental assets. Basically, what did they acquire through swimming, through their experience in swimming. And those are things like that we want our kids to acquire through sport. So support, empowerment, boundaries, constructive use of time, learning, positive values, social competencies, positive identity, the type of things that we would assume in a sport program youth would develop. And what we see is that if you practice sport in the small cities, you would score higher on all these scales, and the ones that are in yellow, they're significantly different. So basically, practicing sport in a small town allows you to become a better person. It will give you more chance of participating in sport later on in life, and it gives you more chance to become a professional athlete. So why? Why is that? You know, I just gave you a number, but there's a number of reasons, and I think right now we're just speculating about this. But there's one study we did last year. We looked at a small town, and we tried to understand a small town in Canada that was very successful, and we tried to understand what was it in that town that was that helped athletes to develop. So the town was a small town in Nova Scotia that has been very well known to develop talent, to develop basketball players, soccer players, and a lot of different sports, but they're very, very good, and their success rate is very, very high compared to another town. So the population, it's very small, 646 people, but here there's numbers in terms of how that town was successful over the years. What we did is we did archives, and we interviewed people in the town, the mayors, the athletes, some coaches. And I won't go through all the data because there's a lot of stuff happening. But really, what the results showed is that it's not only one thing, but it's a mix of things. And it's a mix of types of experience that the kids have in the town that they don't have in a bigger town. It's about the community itself valuing sport. And it's about the social cultural influences, the rivalry with other communities, and the whole bigger picture. But I'll just talk about a couple of little things here. In that town, there was a lot of youth-driven activities. So when you go back to what the kids do, it was not always led by coaches in an organized way, but there was a lot of opportunities for youth to play. in a safe environment, and it happened a lot. And the nice thing about this, too, is there was a lot of mixed-age play also. So kids getting together, but kids of 15-year-old play with 10-year-old, and 11-year-old play with 19 years old, and there was a lot of role modeling. So I want to be like the 15-year-old. And the 15-year-old help the... And very often when you talk about big cities, we don't do that. We put all the kids of the same age, the same size together, and we say, you play together. But that's not what happened here. Lots of indoor mixed-age community. There was a lot of self-directed training, that kind of spontaneous practice. Kids go in the gym and they practice by themselves. In terms of coaching, I just want to point out here, really what came out of what type of coaches they had is that they were not the greatest coaches to teach skill, but they were wonderful people. Like all the athletes talk about their coaches as being just, look at these things here, opening the gym, giving a key to the kids so that they could go in the gym, organizing events in the community, and really, they didn't talk too much about, he was very good at teaching me the skill, but they talked a lot about themselves as human beings and as people. And the interesting thing, too, is that the coach seemed to be coaching the same athlete throughout development. They would stay with the same group. So just to conclude this section, I've put these things at the beginning as hypothesis. And you answer the question to yourself. I think I provided some data to show you that small town seems to... So really, it makes you wonder about what type of coaching do I need to do? Do I really need to be the best skill coach and have the best drill, or do I just need to be close to the kids and make sure that they understand and make sure that they feel good and think about the other 4 C's, the confidence, the connection, and the character, and not only the competence one. And I think I like this very, very much. This is coming from, in the U.S., they did a literature review looking at features of positive developmental setting. I won't talk about it too long here, but basically they came up with those 8 setting features. This is not only about sport, but what they've concluded through a literature review is they said if we're able to implement those 8 setting features in any kinds of program for kids, whether it's music, art, sports, or any kinds of extracurricular activities, we are increasing our chance of developing assets, developing better people. And look at these things. So physical and psychological safety, appropriate structure, supportive relationship, opportunities to belong, positive social norms, support the kids and their efficacy and their mattering, opportunities for skill building, and the integration of family, school, and community. So when you look at this, you think about smaller town, that's probably what happened. It's a lot easier to integrate, to implement those setting features in a smaller club, smaller town, smaller environment than it would be in a big cities where. So again, it doesn't mean that big city cannot be successful, but we need to rethink how we do sport in bigger cities and maybe trying to create those kind of environment and those setting features. All right, so the yellow light's not on yet. I will talk a little bit about, so I talked about this, I talked about the environment here. I will talk about now about a lot of the research that we did here on the type of activities that we should give to children to increase the 3 Ps. Oh, it's yellow now. We've got a yellow light here. 10 minutes? This is a model of sport development that we've been working on for over 12 years now. But what this suggests is different pathways to different outcomes in sport. And there's early specialization pathways which involve high level of deliberate practice, low level of deliberate play, and involvement in one sport. Think about gymnastics as being, you get involved in one sport and do a lot. Versus this kind of model which fits very, very well, I believe, with the structure of Gaelic sport. Where from about 6 to 12, when you go through this period of sampling years where children do a lot of different sport, get involved in deliberate play, low level of deliberate practice, and then from here they could go either into a specialization pathway to become elite level athletes or a recreational pathway. And what I would like to do is give you some postulates about the relationship and how these types of pathways where we looked at different athletes and did some studies, what is the relationship between these different pathways, performance, participation, and personal development? So the first, and I'm going to do this in a summary because I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to give you postulate, but basically these are statements supported by research. And the first one is the relationship between sampling and performance. And what we've been able to show through a lot of different studies here is that if kids do a lot of different sport at a young age, they can still achieve a high level of performance in one sport. Okay, so that's the relationship between sampling and performance. The second one is the relationship between sampling and participation. And what we've been able to show with a lot of different studies is that if you're doing a lot of different sport as a kid, you will have more chance of staying in sport and practicing sport for fun, for recreational purpose as an adult. Okay, the third one is between sampling and personal development. So the third P, the final outcomes. And what this one says is that if you do a lot of different sport at an early age, it allows you to play sport with different coaches, with different group, with different peers, and it will affect you, it will give you more chance to become a better person. And again, a little bit less evidence on this one, but it makes sense from a practical point of view to be that involvement in different sport will give you different assets. Postulate 4 and 5 relates to youth-driven activities or deliberate play. The importance of getting out of the kids' games sometime, getting out as adults and letting them play. And here we've established a relationship between play and performance. And this is a very long sentence, I won't even read it. But what the postulate tells you is that with high-level athletes, we did a lot of retrospective study in the US, Canada, Australia, and we've noticed elite-level athletes, they play sport for fun when they were kids, and they did not always add a coach telling them what to do, but they experiment and they were creative and they tried. So deliberate play, there's a link with performance. The more deliberate play you do at a young age, you will leave a high level of performance. And again, some supporting evidence for that. Postulate 5 deals with deliberate play and participation. So the idea here is in terms of motivation. In deliberate play, youth get involved in deliberate play because they like it and it's fun. So there's a link here between this and motivation. If you let the kids play and if the kids wants to play for fun, then it will allow them to really develop a love for the sport that they will keep for the rest of their life. And I will skip these two here. Those are the transition because I can feel that the red light's going to come soon. So this model of development in sport allows us to say that these kinds of pathways in sport, really we've achieved, if we're able to have these kinds of activities and these kinds of transitions, we will reach our 3 Ps. But if we have this kinds of early specialization in sport, it is likely that we will reach a high level of performance, but there will be some cost in terms of participation and personal development, and a big relationship here between early specialization and more dropout and burnout. And that, again, has been very strong in the literature. So the last one is to look at social. So we looked at the environment. We look at this. Now I'd like to look a little bit more at what kind of coaches do I need to do, coaching to develop competence, confidence, connection, and character in terms of coaching. So the question is, how do coaches in different contexts develop athletes' competence, confidence, connection, and character, and maximize participation, performance, and personal development? The idea here, and this is an article that we've just published, but is that there's different contexts of coaching. And each of the boxes that I've talked about in terms of athlete development require a different types of coach. And what you notice here is you have 2 different participation coach for children and a participation coach for adults and adolescents. And then you would have 2 different types of performance coach. What this means is that it is possible that it is the same person, but each of these contexts require different skills from a coach. So a coach for children and a coach for youth and adolescents will require, and we start from what do the athletes need in terms of confidence, competence, connection, and character, and what do I need to do as a coach to develop those C's. So I will talk a little bit about the performance coach for young adolescents. So it needs to start from, if I'm in that group range, so I have a program where they're on a trajectory to become elite-level athletes. What are the needs of my athletes? Well, I've just summarized this, but there's a need for competence. I need to teach skill. In terms of confidence, young, 14, 15-year-old, they compare themselves with others. Physical appearance is something that's important. The social skills are important. In terms of social connection, there's things that are important. Peer acceptance, friendship quality. This is the age where... So as a coach, I need to know that. And character, I think there's a lot of things that I can teach in terms of sportsmanship, positive values, or caring for others. So if we start from this, then there's types of knowledge that I need to have as a coach that would include professional, interpersonal, or intrapersonal knowledge. So professional knowledge relates to the skill that I need, the pedagogy, the type of things that I need to do to teach skill. The interpersonal knowledge is what kind of person am I to try to or what kind of relationship do I establish with the athletes. And intrapersonal is, and what we've shown in here is that we've been able to show that intrapersonal knowledge is very important to reflect on your practice. I finish a practice, it didn't go that well, I come back and I try to think about what did I do wrong, how can I get better. So we've developed a very elaborate methodology, but I'll just give you the punchline. What we've been able to show in terms of coaching behaviors is that professional behaviors of coaches should focus a lot of good elite-level coaches, good coaches of young athletes will provide a lot of instruction, and they will have an intervention by this guided by long-term learning. And there's a patterns of intervention, and this seems to be something that happens very often. Coaches, very good coaches, go through those cycles of behaviors. And an example here would be cycling between observation. They will observe the practice, they will give positive reinforcement and technical feedback and instruction and go back to observation. There seems to be very, very clear patterns of instruction, and what it does is that athletes know what their coaches. They know the consistency in their coaches, and they're adaptable with these things too. And then there's thing about interpersonal behaviors. Again, in terms of interpersonal behaviors, it's very consistent in terms of what they're going to do. And the patterns that focus on the individual. Coaches care about the person. They ask about how they're doing. And very rarely athletes were negative in the observation studies we did. And then the other thing is we've noticed that observation is a very important part of coaching. Observing and not talking, and really following this up with some very key intervention. Okay, so I've got 3 minutes to finish. So what I presented very quickly, I presented this model, and really what are the key points that I would like to point out based on the big city, small city stuff in terms of environment. Very important to try to implement those 8 setting features in our coaching. And in terms of environment, by doing this, we're creating an environment that is favorable for increasing participation, performance, and personal development. In terms of what I started in terms of activities, I think the retrospective research on activities of athletes really showed us that not only doing this, but really providing an environment where kids can play by themselves and providing different type of activities and that's very important in terms of coaching. It's not only about teaching skills, but it's providing that kind of environment, overall environment. In terms of development, there's some key transitions and some things that we need to do, and really what's in blue here allowed us to build and achieve the 3 Ps. So implications, we just came up with all this work. Wade Gilbert and I, we've wrote a paper and we've talked about a definition of coaching effectiveness, and you have it in your handout. But when people ask you what is coaching, well, there's not really in the literature anything that says, well, you know, it's trying to help people or it's this. So we have this now, I think, and it could be criticized, but what we think that coaching is that it's the consistent application of integrated professional, interpersonal, and intrapersonal knowledge, so the type of things that coaches have, to improve athletes' competence, confidence, connection, and character in specific coaching contexts. So children, youth, adults, those are different contexts. The 4 C's are what I want to develop. And I need to develop knowledge, not only professional knowledge, but also interpersonal and intrapersonal. I will just skip through this because I don't have any time and I feel that they're going to kick me off the stage. 2 more slides. Okay, so in terms of what does this all mean in terms of coaching youth? The environment of youth sport should be centered on those 8 setting features instead of performance outcomes. So very important, very often in sport we focus on performance. Look at those 8 setting features. They focus on the individual and the relationship between the person. Important coaching youth to focus on intrinsically motivating behaviors. When you look at the quadrant, youth-driven activities as much as deliberate practice and adult-driven activity. Encourage and support multi-sport in a variety of contexts. And lastly, you had some talks before and you know about teaching games for understanding, but really it is one quadrant of learning that is very important, and there's a lot of literature on this, but again, the research we do would support this kind of intervention. And I think this is a big one here. This one here. Adults act as resource people who can restructure the play and practice environment, avoiding imposing a rigid structure. I think the last thing we want to do, and really this is a coaching conference and I'm telling coaches not to overcoach, and that's what it is. When you look at all this literature, sometimes we try to overdo it. Let the kids play, let the kids experiment, let the kids be creative. Because I think when you talk to elite athletes, that's what they tell us. They tell us that they have that kind of environment. In smaller cities, they have that kind of environment where they go out and just experiment and just do things. Sometimes we overcoach, we overdo it. And about year-round training in one sport. So thank you very much.